Hello everybody, my name is Brandon Schollenberger, and today I'm going to discuss an important issue in the global warming debate. You may have heard of it before. It's called the hockey stick controversy. For those of you who haven't heard of this, it revolves around this graph created by scientists Michael Mann, Raymond Bradley, and Malcolm Hughes. They sought to reconstruct temperatures of the northern hemisphere back in time for approximately 1,000 years, claiming temperatures had barely changed for 800 years, then suddenly shot up around the time of the Industrial Revolution. The visual impact was enormous. It quickly gained media attention, but it only became a central image in the global warming debate after it was prominently displayed in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, Third Assessment Report. The IPCC, a body established by the United Nations, produces assessment reports on global warming twice a decade. These reports are generally considered to reflect the scientific consensus on global warming. The prominent display of a graph with such a strong visual impact in one of these reports guaranteed that graph would become a media sensation. It did. It quickly became the central image in the global warming debate. This caused a number of people to become curious about that graph. One person, a Canadian named Steve McIntyre, asked Michael Mann for some basic information about his graph in order to better understand it. The responses were unsatisfying, with the authors unable to even provide the data they used to make the graph. After years of back and forth, thanks to many questions, arguments, and publications, most of the details of how the graph was made were figured out. I'm going to explain the most important ones. The central aspect of this hockey stick graph is the data used to create it. A total of 415 data series were used. Most of these were taken from tree rings, as tree growth can be affected by temperature. Measurements of other natural phenomena, such as ocean coral growths, were also used. One problem was most of the data came from the same general areas. 415 data series sounds impressive until you realize over 200 of them came from measurements of tree rings in one part of North America. To address this problem, Mann and his colleagues combined similar data in similar areas before comparing it to data in other areas. The process they used, a strange variant of something called principal component analysis, took the 415 data series and reduced them to 112 series they called temperature proxies. The idea was these 112 proxies were nature's measurements of past temperatures. Strangely, the authors listed 22 of these as precipitation, not temperature proxies. Even stranger, 22 of these proxies were actually measurements taken by humans, not nature. That's not important though. What is important is only 22 of these series extended back to 1400 AD. Even fewer extended back to 1000 AD. Because there were so few long series, we can examine each of them. When we do, we find very few look anything like a hockey stick. In fact, we find only two of these 22 so-called temperature proxies indicate modern temperatures are anomalously high. That is, only 2 of 22 proxies, or even less than 10% of their data, supports their results back to 1400 AD. There is even less data supporting their results back to 1000 AD. That should raise a ton of red flags. It gets worse though. Of these two proxies, one is known as the GASP series. In the Mann et al. Data file, it was labeled Treeline 11. You can see it on your screen. You may have noticed the beginning of this series is rather strange. There is a flat line at the start of it. This is because Mann and his colleagues cheated to include this data. You see, they had a rule which said series had to extend back to 1400 AD to be used in the calculation of temperatures back to 1400 AD. It's a sensible rule. It's also a rule they chose not to follow with this series. This series only began in 1404. So they could include it further back, they artificially extended the series back to 1400 AD by adding in artificial data. That is where the flat line came from. This may seem minor, but it becomes worse when you consider the second hockey stick shaped proxy. That proxy is labeled NOAMR, short for North American, PC1. PC1 means it is the first proxy calculated by the previously mentioned principal component analysis. The North American tree ring dataset used to create this proxy includes a proxy titled Cana 036. When we plot Cana 36 along with treeline 11, we can see they are the same series. The only difference is treeline 11 was artificially extended so it could be used when calculating temperatures back to 1400 AD. Why was the gas series used twice? We don't know. The authors never told anyone why they used the same series twice. Why was one copy of the gas series combined with other series from the same area while the other copy was not? We don't know. The authors never told anyone they artificially extended the treeline 11 series. What we do know is only two proxies going back to 1400 AD had a hockey stick shape. The authors were able to use one of those proxies only because they duplicated and artificially extended it without telling anyone. There were problems with the gas series itself, but we don't need to worry about them. That the authors had to go to such lengths to include this data is enough to cause concern. If their data was good, why would they need to resort to such strange tricks to produce their results? We should, however, look at the other proxy which had a hockey stick shape. This proxy, NoMRPC1, is created primarily out of tree ring data collected by a man named Donald Graybill. When describing the data he collected, he cautioned, calibration of tree ring records of this nature with instrumental climate records may not be feasible. If the people who collect data worry that data cannot be calibrated in modern temperature records, why would Michael Mann and his colleagues use it to measure past temperatures? We don't know. They never even mentioned Graybill's concerns. So where does that leave us? We have a world-renowned hockey stick graph which says modern temperatures are unlike anything we've seen in 1,000 years. For about half that period, only two proxies support that claim. The person who collected one of these proxies said we don't know if it actually reflects temperatures. The other proxy was from the same dataset as that one, but was randomly duplicated so it could be used separately. Had one of its two copies artificially extended just so it could be used to support the author's results all the way back to 1400 AD, and all of this was hidden by the authors of the paper. So where does this leave us? I don't know. The hockey stick graph was the single most famous image in the global warming discussion. It was promoted as the most important image in all of climate science by the institutional bodies endorsed by climate scientists. It was also complete rubbish. It was based entirely upon a small amount of data from a single region in North America. I haven't even discussed the problems with that data. The simple reality is a tiny amount of data from one area cannot possibly be said to indicate temperatures for an entire hemisphere. It's especially true if that data is cherry-picked by duplicating and artificially extending it. There are tons of other issues to discuss in the hockey stick debate. I haven't even scratched on the surface of the problems with this paper. There are also a ton of other papers on this subject. Some people would say we should only look at those. They say we should ignore this graph because it's old. However, Michael Mann is a superstar in the climate science field. He became that because of this graph. He became one of the most famous people in the climate science field by cherry-picking a tiny amount of data and pretending it tells us all sorts of wonderful things. Climate scientists didn't speak out against him. They praised him. They promoted him. They made him their figurehead in the global warming debate. If the figurehead of the global warming debate a decade ago was selected for publishing utter dreck, why should we have any faith in what is said now? If climate scientists were once happy to say a small amount of mystical trees in one location can magically tell us the temperatures of half the planet for 1,000 years, what might they be happy to tell us now?